before you pour frigging gas on it with AI, ML, or LLM. And then you're just like, here we go, we're ready to go. My CEO says, oh, look, he's tearing it down. He's like,
destroying my backdrop.
He's fired up over this conversation.
Buckle up. You've just hit the play button on The Notice, a podcast from OTAVA with hosts TJ Houske and Melissa Locke. Expect to laugh, nod vigorously, and maybe even fist pump as we dive deep into the tech that powers your business, leadership that uplifts, and how culture can make your company the kind of place where everyone wants to clock in. So if you're ready for insights that stick and laughs that last, you've got a seat at our table. Welcome to The Notice, where tech gets personal and growth is a group project. Let's get started.
All right, we are back. So Tech Talks to the podcast world and to those that tune in. I'm TJ Houske, and with me is Ben Stiles, Justin Keller, and Chris Borylski. And we're excited to spend some time. This has kind of been a brainchild for a little while of like, hey, we know that what we tell the world is we have differentiated experience through people. And our customers give us that feedback, right, in our surveys and the like, when it comes to our unique ability to solution. And I think that's what separates us from a lot of our peer groups in the market is, we have hundreds and hundreds of customers, but of those hundreds and hundreds, we also have hundreds and hundreds of variation deployments, right? Unique, purpose built. And so it's the devil that you know, but at the same time it gets you because that's not an easy thing to maintain and scale. And so we accept it. We take the good with the bad, but what comes with it and the reason we can do a business like that is because of the skill sets on this call. And so that was where this started from, is like, how do I share this thought leadership with the world and help add that value back? I always say, like, give back, make it better, especially in a time where I feel like there's a whole lot of companies out there making a massive amount of profit on making things incredibly complicated, complex, and confusing. So hopefully we can simplify this thing and show folks how they can save money, solve problems. And some of this stuff is actually common sense. It doesn't even require buying technology. And then some of it is certainly the technology choices that you make in the orders in which you do them. So anyway, that's kind of the segue into this. Justin, I'll let you start if you want to just introduce yourself and your role. And then Ben, you could go next, and Chris. And then I've got a series of topics we'll just kind of open up and talk about casually here. And hopefully folks find value and give us feedback that, hey, we'd love for you to dig deeper in future episodes on these topics.
Perfect. Well, I'm Justin Keller. I'm the Vice President of Technology and Engineering here at OTAVA. I run our platform engineering and infrastructure engineering teams.
That's awesome. Ben?
Excellent. I'm Ben Stiles. I'm field CTO here at OTAVA, so I spend a lot of time talking with our clients in the field about major initiatives, improvements that they're looking, and making sure that we've got good market alignment with both our solutions and the needs we see on a regular basis.
And I'm Chris Borylski. I am the product manager over, as our team likes to joke, everything but Microsoft. But my focus is really on the business resilience suite of products and how they interact with everything else we do.
That's awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Well, so, one of the topics that I was interested in today was, this is that time of year where you seem to pile on through summer, the conferences. So the partner advisory councils of many of our technology partners, in our case, VMware, Broadcom, Veeam, NetApp, those are big ones that we participate on. And then for some, we sit on the Partner Advisory Council. For others, we sit on Partner Advisory Council and Technical Advisory Board. Some of them we sit on executive boards. And so I figured that's a really good place to start is, what are the market trends? Maybe we can debunk some of the junk out there that I think is going on. So let's start with the conferences that we've gone to and some of the bigger trends, and I'll kick it off. And then just kind of hand it over and we can talk about this openly. So from my perspective, what I have seen over the last 6 months, really trailing 12, but the last 6, if we use listening posts being those specific conferences, is really 3 big things, right? Now, obviously, back up a second, you have Broadcom acquire VMware. That was a 2-year journey, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. But bigger than that, it was a strategic play by a hardware manufacturer, as I'll call them, to really gobble up the biggest incumbent for cloud virtualization, right? I would call them the godfather of cloud in VMware, right? And so that had a ripple effect. And I would say that that was quite disrupting is the right word to use. And so you had polarizing views. You had some people, a large percentage, that would say the world is coming to an end, right? Like it's all done. Everybody's leaving VMware. It's about to crash. Everybody's going to go to the public cloud. So that was like one audience of people. And then you saw the other audience of people that were like, you're overreacting. Like that's not what's going to happen. You are going to see pricing changes. You are going to see structural changes to the company. That is no surprise. But in some ways, I think you could see simplification and consolidation, right? So there could be some, value out of that. And then you have the others out there that still to this day are like, hey, Broadcom bought VMware, and you're like, okay, you're not paying attention. So that's kind of like the three audiences that I saw. But those are the reactions that I saw. And then the ripple effect of that certainly is we've seen pricing structures change. And for many across the board, they've gone up. We've seen licensing structure change in what is being serviced today is very different than what was serviced yesterday. But I would argue, and I know there'll be many that would disagree with me, that in general, the foundation of VMware and their core licensing sets are still the same. Right? They're still offering the same feature sets. The way they deliver them is a little bit different, but it's not like it went away, right? It is more expensive. And so you have to be more strategic about how you architect on a go-forward basis and you manage. But as far as, is it worse? I don't know that you could say that yet. I think it's broken and they're trying to clean it up. But I don't know that it's worse is kind of how I'll open up this section for VMware Broadcom. So Justin, you've been at Explorer with me a couple of times and you've seen it firsthand. You sit on a lot of these boards. Like what's your take and what feedback would you give so far?
Yeah, I think you called it, right? You have the people that are going to move away from Broadcom, right? They have a drive to get away from that, and that's fine. You'll see that across some of the stuff we're going to talk about, right? A lot of vendors are opening up doors with other integrations to other hypervisors for just that reason. But in my opinion, I'm with you. I don't think the Broadcom changes are that earth-shaking, right? If you pay attention, you align your technology strategy to the new licensing model, you're going to come out pretty close to where you were originally, right? If you were only using ESXi and vCenter in small environments, that's where you're seeing a lot of the large upticks, essentially from minimum core limits and CPUs. So those smaller companies that had multiple hosts with 8 cores per CPU, those guys got hit with the 16 core floor, right? And of course, it doubled or tripled their licensing cost. There's a lot of benefits to your point with simplification and condensation or compaction, where you have the new VVF and VCF structures, where if you're making use of those tools, you're actually in a good position to potentially step back and maybe cut some other costs in your operations by leveraging some of those pieces that used to cost additional.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it, right? I know for us, and I want to get Ben's take and Chris's take, but I think for us, how I would describe this to, especially the service provider community. So let's kind of break this apart, right? The impact was different or is different to the service provider community than it is to the enterprise customer community. And you have to recognize that. If you're an enterprise customer and you're listening to this and you haven't really figured out how to readjust your capital strategy and your OpEx strategy by partnering with the cloud service provider, now's the time to do it, because now the burden really lives with the cloud service provider to manage, maintain, and control optimization. And you could actually relieve your business of a ton of cost. And that's what I would be doing. And I was an enterprise buyer for a lot of time. So now more than ever, on-prem private cloud, which could be hosted and managed by a cloud provider like an OTAVA, or hosted private cloud can really change the game for you, because it's not necessarily as advantageous as an enterprise customer to pay those cost increases. You don't get the scaled economies that the managed service providers are doing. Now let's talk about why here for just a second, and that is bloat, right? So what the business side of this is about, people don't want to talk about it, is CEO of VMware Hock Tan is executing a really bold and makes sense strategy. And he's saying, hey, I know who my ideal customer is, and I'm going after my ideal customer. And if you're not, I'm okay with you down market rolling out to non-VMware hypervisors, and I'm I'm okay with it. Like it's a budgeted churn and customer loss that I'm okay with, because I'm getting down to my ideal customer, my ideal product stack, and I'm going to run the table, at that level and be competitive. And I think they're proving that out. I think time will be told the story a little bit more 1, 2, 3 years from now, as people are finishing out their first 3-year commitments under the new license structures. But it's a smart business play. We might not agree with it, but it's a publicly traded company. It's a big one. He's got a pretty good track record. So I tell you what, he followed through on exactly what he said he was going to do. So you
do that.
You got to go with that one, right? So Styles, give me your take. You've spent the last year out talking to customers about this with me, with Justin. So you've got customer feedback, on a regular for this one.
Yeah, definitely have some customer feedback I can share on that front, because it's pretty interesting. I find that I have kind of one question that is a little bit disarming to people when we're having this cloud hypervisor conversation, and that is the move away from Broadcom. What improvements are you planning on making in that ecosystem? And a lot of times that pivots the conversation right back to, okay, you guys as a cloud service provider, you decouple that relationship, you take that on, you've already vetted the scale that we need and the adherence to the new programs. So a lot of times they're looking at us and saying, hey, this differentiates and changes our Broadcom relationship. We're still going to use the same hypervisor. It's just we no longer own the risk and the relationship with Broadcom on that long term. They're picking an OTAVA to pick those things up for them. And it's really been interesting from that perspective there, because VMware has been that market leader in the space and had such a large market share throughout this, that we are seeing, lots of people evaluating, but very short lists of gains being made because of the evaluation and the improvement. And I think that's an important thing to keep top of mind there for a lot of people evaluating.
It's a good call out. Chris, how about you, bud? You're seeing the intersection to the other product sets that are third party in support of the hypervisor.
Yeah, no, I think that for me is the big thing, right? When you're talking about this consolidation of the smaller customers, or the customers that don't have the CSP and MSP size deployments, we start talking about DR, right? Your DR bill just went up whatever X amount, but when you're playing in a CSP environment and we've got all of these different cloud sites that we have already deployed, those DR costs don't hit us the same way it hits these other smaller, independently run sites.
Yeah, I think, related to this and how it connects to the other partner advisory council sessions that we've all sat in this year, so you have this big announcement by Broadcom. Now, this isn't new news, right? This acquisition's been going on for 2 years. It finally closes after some different regulatory pressures in different countries. And I think, I believe China was one of the last on the holdout side. And once they finished, kind of what their concessions were, this obviously came to a close. And certainly more complex details behind the scenes on the actual deal itself. But this wasn't a surprise, right? But you had a lot of anecdotal comments, including mass evacuation from the VMware ecosystem. And everybody's going to leave and go to public cloud, and everybody's going to leave and go to OVH. Everybody's going to leave and, go to Microsoft. And I'm sorry, this will go down as a hashtag, I'm sure. But get real. Okay. You're talking about multiple decades of a dominant provider in the market space that has consistently innovated on a stack that is cradle to grave, top notch. Now, does it have its limitations? Of course it does. I mean, they're kind of like the New England Patriots during their era. They're easy to hit and fodder, right? Because they're destroying everybody with regularity and specificity, right? And for a long time, there were partners in the world that were exploiting that, right? So Veeam did a fantastic job of exploiting some limitations on, legacy disaster recovery and backup limitations, in the VMware ecosystem. Fortinet did a fantastic job amongst Cisco and others of exploiting limitations on NSX within the stack. But here's what's funny is that everybody wants to talk about what VMware is right now, but they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit on this, because what I can tell you is the distance between what they weren't a few years ago versus what they are now is very close. in comparison to when you look at what those differentiations were, that you could say, well, I can't buy VCDA because I can't get these kinds of things. So I'm going to go get this. And now we talk about this all the time. We're like, dude, a lot of this stuff you could consolidate into single stack. And if your issue as an enterprise customer, rightfully so, is your prices are going up significantly because you can't many to one on your cores, it's 1-to-1 as an enterprise customer, right? Then leverage somebody else's capital and stick it in their cloud, like, and still put the pressure on them to manage it the way that you want, or do an on-prem managed cloud deployment so you can co-labor, with that, get self-service functionality. But to suggest that, I know it's going to sound bad, but Nutanix is not going to sponsor this call. But to suggest that it's like, oh, just lift and shift, move everything to Nutanix. Lift and shift, move everything to name the next company. And Nutanix is a wonderful company. You have a whole new world to go with in this. You have cross-training. You have platform readiness. You have to re-architect. Like when you think about the shift to move your strategy from one software to another, it is not a small feat. And I think a lot of folks are looking at this from a math perspective, going, well, it's going to be cheaper to move. And you're like, I don't know that your model is reflecting all the costs that are going to go into moving this thing.
Yeah,
So
the actual
why don't we talk? Why
Right.
don't we talk about that? Because there's a lot of money that goes into moving platforms.
Yep. And we always know this with leveling up skill sets, taking on new technologies, learning new stuff. That learning curve is real for a lot of those organizations as well. And again, we're talking about if you're moving away from the market leader in that space, then you're going to a smaller captive pool of technical resources able to even jump in and deliver engineering differentiation for your business.
100%, right, Justin? Yeah. I know you got tons of feedback on this one.
I think that's a huge one people overlook is, right, when you have somebody, and like Cisco's another prime example, right, on the network side. When you have somebody that's so dominant in that space, it's easier to find resources with them, right? So if I run a Cisco-backed network, it's much easier for me to go out and acquire new talent to come into the company and help out. Well, if you go with somebody smaller, your pool's smaller, and that becomes a real challenge depending, right? So going to Nutanix, you might have a real struggle when you're trying to recruit new talent. You might have a real struggle trying to find people to help you, and that can be a huge problem.
Right. Well, and I'm confident out there for, I have many friends that are CFOs, and obviously my journey came up through CTO, COO, and now CEO in a few different companies. From a dollars and cents perspective, there's a natural inclination that says every engineer is just an engineer, right? So it's a toaster with an IP address. It's an IoT device. Send it to tech support, right? They're going to manage it. So no different. It's like, well, a cloud is a cloud. Like Nutanix is not that different than, VMware. And so just stand that up and you're going to be able to manage it. This is actually the number one mistake I see companies make all the time, is that the finance side of their business drives this without a fulsome understanding, in part because the tech side has some social dysfunctional issues in communicating, like, well, this is what it actually means, right? And that's on us. Like, we know, we're like, okay, we're not always so great at connecting the dots to the economics side of this. But if you really could model out appropriately the actual cost of ownership from a proficiency and efficiency perspective, you would be hard pressed to sell me that you could move hypervisors in the next couple of years. If you're a large enough enterprise, you really should be looking at how could I re-architect to take advantage of a north-south architecture, which is really what they've driven for high density workloads, versus what you were doing before, which was, I'm not really worried about my core count. I'm just distributing out my workloads and just, dealing with it, right? So I think that's being missed. And I think people are reacting in an emotional way instead of a logical way. And they're like, that's it. I'm taking my ball and I'm leaving. I'm going somewhere else. And then they're going to get there and they're going to get the bill. And then they're going to have to troubleshoot it. And they're like, maybe I'm going back home.
This is muscle memory that hasn't existed in this particular product space in our industry for quite some time, right? We've all been used to rationalizing new storage platforms and the cost of better, faster drives, but...
Well, and I connect the dots. So Chris, I'll give you a chance here to plug in because this one makes sense a lot in your world, right? But then there's the ancillary impact. So we're now not just changing the hypervisor. Now our core products for backup as a service or disaster recovery as a service in our enterprise. Let's say that you chose Veeam as an enterprise customer. They're knocking on a $2 billion door right now. They've grown tremendously. VMware is a huge partner for them. So imagine whatever the hypervisor of choice is that's not Broadcom that you're you're shifting to. Chris, does that have an impact on the Veeam relationship and the integration?
Just a little one. I mean, right? When you're talking about the preeminent leader, when Veeam has spent the last 5 or 10 years developing all of its features, do you know what it's developing its features for? Yeah, for VMware.
Yep.
So then you switch to someone like Nutanix, and you're like, oh, well, I get 85% of what I got. That's good enough. It'll still run my backups, until you run into that 15% that you're like, oh, wait, I can't do secure restore, or, pick your niche thing that you need when you need your backups, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now you're out on a lamb, right? Like, what are you going to do? And to your point earlier about, we're talking about lift and shift. How many customer projects we've done lifting and shifting into OTAVA cloud, and it takes 6 months to a year sometimes. So you're going to pay licensing for a year to leave to then do what?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you make a really great point, right? And as we kind of think about shifting from, the hypervisor portion to maybe now storage, and we'll get over into NetApp and some of the things that we've seen that are being developed there, you make a really good call out, right? So if you kind of compare this to the cellular revolution and handhelds, you look at iPhone versus Android, and for how long it still exists today. People are like, it's in the App Store, but I can't get it in Google Play. Like, when are you going to have a Droid app? Well, the standard, right, wrong, or indifferent, that they built frameworks on was Apple ecosystem first, right? And so development cycles, they've compressed. People have gotten quicker at being able to dual launch, but it's still not one-to-one all the time in every area, right? Or sometimes businesses go, it's more cost effective for me to maintain that app in just one ecosystem. And so I'm going to hedge, and I'm going to hedge on, they don't hedge on Google. They hedge on iPhone, like on iOS, like they just do, because of, just kind of the standard, to it. So you think about the VMware impact of that. That's where I'm hearing the ripple effect at PAC councils behind the scenes is development API integration. And some of those things is not up to par on non-Broadcom hypervisors. And so, and Broadcom is not giving that IP away. they're not telling their competitors, well, this is how we did it. They're like, pound sand, dude. Go figure that out on your own. So now you have people that are really wrestling with, okay, I found a hypervisor I want to try to get over to. I can't get it to work the way I want it to work. And to your point, they're straddling double expense because they're paying for a new cloud that they're trying to get into. And then you know what's going to happen? They're going to get halfway through and go, I just can't, like, I'm getting pressure now from my CFO and I got to roll it back. And now you just burn cash, right? And we're seeing that because we're doing a lot of cleanup projects right now for customers that are like, hey, I'm really stuck and I need you to roll me back.
And I kind of compare it to, early cloud adoption, right? Where you get these guys that I'm going to Azure, and then 2 years in and they've got costs exploding everywhere and things aren't going well, and they end up coming back and going back on. And I don't want to see people do that right now, right? I don't want to see people make that mistake. Right. It's probably better to optimize your infrastructure to align to the new licensing model and wait it out a few years before you go ahead and start lifting and shifting your entire tech stack to accommodate a new hypervisor because you're mad at Broadcom.
Yeah. And just to that point, how much of an early adopter do you want? How much risk of being an early adopter are you willing to take, right? Do you want to dive in feet first and say, we'll figure it out? Or do you give it 2 years, take your body shots, and then figure it out in 2 years when everything has kind of settled and what's what?
This feels like a Mike Tyson moment. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And then they're like, well, this isn't going so great. Right? So no, it's a good call out. I think here's an interesting observation, kind of transitioning into the storage side. So we're a big NetApp partner. For those of you that can feel the pain, I will be the first to disclose this. NetApp, we'd appreciate your sponsorship. Every storage platform has its pros and cons, every one of them. There is no well, you're the best. I do believe in each platform, Infinidat, NetApp, HPE, there is one thing or two things. They really are the best at that one thing. And that is how they've captured so much market. What I find now is it's like the NFL. There's more parity than ever. And so it's like any given Sunday, right? One storage appliance is going to win over another one, depending on what you're trying to solve for. But in the past, it was cloud pulled through to storage presented in multiple formats, and you really didn't care under the hood what your storage was. You're like, big deal. Now, however, you're watching folks that are like, I don't know. I really need to dig a little deeper into why am I picking that storage platform? What am I trying to get out of it? Because if you really are part of the camp that we just talked about in the first part, where you're thinking about shifting your hypervisor strategy, one way to get there quicker is to really understand your storage strategy of what you're wanting to do. Because if you do that right, it actually is a little bit easier for you to shift from one hypervisor to another and put a little bit more horsepower down stack and say, I'm going to take this off the hypervisor and put this down to the chassis level. And in the case of NetApp, and why we chose them, is there's just a lot of versatility in the software. And they're innovating on a regular basis. And in fairness, again, similar in the juggernaut space when it comes to APIs and integration, NetApp is kind of clobbering everybody, on that side. So, Justin, you want to talk about that? You've been a NetApp guy, and you've been a storage guy across the board, but you've been deeply invested into NetApp for the better part of 12, 13 years?
Yeah, probably about that. Right. I think it was 2012 when I walked into a company that had purchased NetApp, and actually it might have been before that. Either way, I walked in, was taking over for somebody that was there before me. They had already purchased a NetApp array. I had never used NetApp at the time. Had some professional services, and I was super impressed even back then with how the platform implemented and how it worked. And it's only continued to get better. So yes, I am a bit of a self-proclaimed NetApp fanboy. I do think they're awesome, and I think what they're doing is very awesome.
He drinks the Kool-Aid, folks.
I drank the Kool-Aid fully on that front. So
for good reason though as well, right? There's a lot
right?
of things when we talk about flexibility of a client environment and the ability to scale data sets, present different protocols to scale performance very specifically for a single client workload. That's gold for you and the team there. So I definitely see why you would enjoy those tool sets, having lived on the back end of other storage arrays that weren't quite so flexible.
Right. And again, when you get to the point where you're talking block storage for either mounting ones or data stores for VMDKs, right, pick one. When you're coming down to just performance and IO and that stuff, there's not a lot of competition, or I should say there's a lot of competition there, right? Many vendors can support that. Many vendors can do just as good of a job as the other. Very good stuff. But when you start getting past that to more advanced data management and multi-cloud data and all that stuff, I think that's where NetApp really got their foot in the door early and really got themselves in the front, right? They're the only first-party storage provider in all the hyperscalers, right? So
when you came out of this year's expo, what was your biggest takeaway? I know that everybody's talking large language models and AI and GPUs, and don't get me wrong, I love that stuff. I've been studying that stuff. I love that people think it's brand new. I've been studying this stuff for a long time. But it's more readily available, and because of that, it's more relevant now than ever before. And so listening to NetApp and coming out of that technical advisory board, what were your big takeaways this year, where they're innovating aggressively?
So I had three good ones that I kind of came out of there with. Obviously, there was a ton of stuff when you're talking about new hardware platforms and new software updates and features and stuff like that. There's three. One I can't talk about because of NDAs, so I can't say anything about it. But it goes back to our making hypervisors more, maybe the shifting between hypervisors a little easier, but I can't really talk about that one. Second one, of course, is their new plans around AI and data management and classification, right? So as all this new availability to large language models and machine learning models there's more off-the-shelf ones now, right, than there were previously. But you have to get your personal data into them. And NetApp's doing some really good stuff with data pipelines and data classification right at the storage array level. So if you're using, more than block storage, you're doing NFS, CIFS, S3 through NetApp and using some of their BlueXP management and classification tools, you can now seamlessly pipe that right into a new model in a new feed. And right from the storage, right? You can API right to the storage array, pull the data in. You don't have to manage multiple copies of data. You can snap that stuff across all the different hyperscalers and have one single
Now that's
copy
the
of
big
data.
one, right? When you can take an API at an interface level and drop that down to the storage level, that's pretty savvy. That's pretty slick, right? And they're also, I know they're digging pretty deep into their warranties against, 100% ransomware free
Oh, yeah.
guarantee.
Yep. So they're really big pushing the most secure storage platform on the planet right now. They have some new rate certifications from the DoD and NSA that I can't remember which one of the two it is, but they're the only ones that hold it. So they are very much throwing their weight around in that space. They continue to improve on their autonomous ransomware protection or the ARP platform. It is pretty sweet. It looks really good. We're in the process of implementing some of it now in our environments, right? So to make the most use of it, you have to be using advanced file services, but you can still do some of it with
that's an important call out. I'll say that, and I'd love to get Chris's take on some Veeam stuff here next. And Ben and I can fill the gaps on some customer trends. But here's one thing I'm seeing, right? So everybody uses really big words: ransomware, AI, ML, and nobody offers any value. They just make you afraid of it, tell you who to blame for it, and then tell you how much it's going to cost to fix it. So at a high level, for the world listening, like, there's a reason why OTAVA has chosen very specific partners in our tech stack, because we are solving that problem for you. So in our case, we're moving to a workload architecture that allows for a customer not to have to ask that question. We've already provided it for. We truly believe it should just be table stakes. You put your workload in a cloud provider's environment, it's protected from ransomware. Period. I don't want to leave you to figure out if the stove is hot by touching it. I'd rather just solve this problem for you, architect it well, protect your data, and have a more interesting conversation about how do you want to get your data from this cloud to the next cloud. Right. So I really love that you called that out, but that is something that we're doing, is we're taking advantage of these features. We're deep into these partnerships, and I'd rather be, a mile deep than an inch wide in some of these tech partnerships to make sure that we give the most value to our customers in what we're branding as OTAVA Cloud, but we have that powered by Azure, powered by VMware, and then we have that backed by NetApp, and then we bolster that with third-party services in Zerto, Veeam, and others. And so I love that you're calling that out. I think that's really important for folks to know, like, we're doing that. And if you're not asking your salesperson about that, ask your solution architect. Like, hey, tell me about where you're going with the tech roadmap there, because I don't want to worry about that stuff. Everybody's knocking on my door telling me ransomware is real. It is. You don't have to be afraid of it. You just have to design for it and prepare for it, because it is a when, it is not an if. So just prepare for it, design appropriately, so that way you have the right tool sets to dig you out when it happens.
Right? Not to toot our own horn here a little bit, but we've had multiple clients that have actually had issues, right, or been compromised, and thus far, unless Chris, and Ben tell me something I don't know, I don't think we've ever been able not to recover 100% of those clients. Sometimes very, very quickly. So. Right. It's one of the things
some of them have been
mind.
Some of them have been very large and very gross.
Some of them have been very large and very gross. So, thankfully, knock on wood and toot our own horn a little bit there, we've done a pretty good job there, and we've kind of built that right into the platform, right?
Yeah. And a shout out to NetApp and to VMware. They've spent a lot of time, Azure too. But those technical resources on those sides have spent a lot of time with us in giving architectural feedback and best practices recommendations. And so we're where we are because of the partnerships. But hey, Chris, so let's talk a little bit about data protection and Veeam. We just finished the Partner Advisory Council there. It's one of your favorite product sets. You've been with that product for quite a while. You've just captured your VMCE recently. Congratulations. That is not an easy certification. That's a very hard certification. So talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing with Veeam and what they just announced at their Partner Advisory Council that we can talk about, and where do you see us going with that platform for data protection?
Yeah, so let's take a couple of steps back, right? So we talked about storage platforms and going with NetApp, there are other platforms, so we talk about backups, right? As a service provider, we could go with the storage that gives us the most deduplication, right? Because then we get a bunch of storage, bunch of backups for less, right? But what we get with NetApp is all of the other stuff, the flexibility for use across multiple products, like our like object storage and things like that. That's really, really useful for the wholesome backup and data protection solution that we're going for, right? And the other part that I really love about what you just said about the NetApp stuff is we get to plug storage as a part of our secure framework now, because all of a sudden it's part of our security stance, right? That's great. Love that. When it comes to our friends at Veeam, to double up on that, when we talk about ransomware, earlier this year they bought a company called Coveware, who's a response organization, right? So
Yeah.
now we've got an assurance from NetApp that they will be able to recover us, right? And then we've got our partner at Veeam has this dedicated team to, okay, what do you have? Where are you? What are you trying to recover? We can pair those two things together, and boom, guess what? We're good. If you're with us, you're good.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a good call that I left the executive briefing there, and the single biggest takeaway that I had was this, and that is regardless of the hypervisor, and they did a really great job. I thought Veeam did a fantastic job of giving a pretty good market forecast of where folks are trending. And you could argue instead of, 2 out of 10, it's closer to 5 out of 10 right now, are asking the question about what is the future of my hypervisor because I have to, right? So that's necessary. But the other side of that feedback is a lot of them are saying they're not necessarily looking at leaving VMware now. They're saying we're not sure yet because we have other bigger questions to answer. And those questions they're saying is, how are we going to organize our data to prepare it for AI and prepare it for large language models? And how are we going to protect that data? And then, yeah, we want to figure out our hypervisor components, but really that wasn't something they were thinking about, right? So said differently, before the announcement, most people that were sitting on VMware were going to stay on VMware. They weren't going anywhere. They were focused on more advanced initiatives. That disruption forced them to pull back a little bit and say, wow, I got to reevaluate. Is this really what I'm going to stay with? And I think that if you can address the questions of how we're solving for data protection, how we're solving for data classification, how we're solving for anti-ransomware, then customers are more interested in that full solution now and saying like, okay, help me understand a technology roadmap that gets me to, what I want to do, which is take advantage of business analytics, right? More intelligent use of my services. So I think Veeam did a really good job of talking about that. And then Veeam did an excellent job of really differentiating on where they're going. And I think this is important for folks to know. So I don't know, they'll get mad at me for saying this, but they admitted that they themselves up until recently didn't, God bless you, Ben, didn't consider themselves an enterprise company, enterprise levels, like large enterprise software. They were fighting to get into that market space. Now they're being considered as a true competitor. They've earned the right to be put in a room and have a large enterprise conversation. They've cleaned up a lot of the code bugs and the things that they're trying to do with feature parity and some other stuff. And I think they have officially reached that pinnacle now that they can have that conversation and go to bat and win some large business there. But what they really said is, in addition to enterprise, we're becoming more cyber centric. Like we're very focused on our data protection services are truly from a cyber perspective of protecting you from ransomware, proactively identifying through predictive analytics and looking at correlation and malicious activity through threat mapping of ingress to egress or egress to ingress activity, to say, okay, what's going on? Looking for data exfiltration, so they're doing a lot of patternistic things that I think are going to put them in a space where they could create some really interesting momentum for them, where it's like now people are talking to them as a leader in cyber defense, over data protection, which is pretty cool. Like good for them, to take a shot at it. But they've got the right feature sets. Cobra was a smart acquisition. Integrating, it's always the hard part. So, but I do think they're doing some pretty cool things there. Yeah. So Styles, Let's bring it all together. You're seeing the customer conversations. We're having this on a regular basis. And, Justin's Ace Ventura here at OTAVA. So Pete's just hanging out in the background. So Ben, what are you seeing right now from the customers in the last 90 days with us going back out in the market after these events? Where are you seeing some things that are interesting?
Yeah, from a market interest perspective, you were talking about kind of themes across some of these client events and vendors in the market space there. What I'm seeing on that side, everybody, it's security and it's AI. Those are the two things. A lot of times those conversations overlap with each other and people want to jump into, how do I secure my AI conversation? But those two topics seem to be what's at the top of everybody's mind right now in the industry and where people are focused from. Am I preparing and aligning for whatever mystery AI ask the business is going to come to me with? And then on the other side of that, from a security perspective, do I have the coverage that is appropriate for my business? Are we treating the right data with the right sets of rigor and controls so that they can go in and have that management? So those things are constantly at the top of mind for people, and these are very fast evolving markets, right? So you've got a lot of people with a lot of breadth of security tools with security questions while they've got a more complex ecosystem. So I think IT administrators right now are dealing with probably the largest breadth of use resources and tooling they can have in their environment, coupled with the most broad ways that people can come in and try and exploit or take advantage of vulnerability in their system as well. So those two things are consistently top of mind for clients, and they're constantly looking for those proof points on what are you doing. And that's why we've got that secure framework, why we take them down that conversation of each of the different components for, shrinking that attack vector, getting those things right so that we can speak competently to how they're evolving as a business, how they're staying in front of those threats, and really the important part there being able to tie it back to that business side, which is the dollars and cents, the insurance riders for the cyber recovery, the stuff that keeps the CFOs up at night.
Yeah, no, it's a good call out. I think, for this final portion of today's call, what I think a lot of customers are really struggling with, and I get it, is they have so much more complexity in their environments in the last 10 years than in the previous 10. And the rate of operational tempo is increased. The rate of technological advancement is increasing. And we feel it. We feel it here. We're always talking about, geez, forget skilling up. It's just never ending. Like, we're just constantly in this cycle. And so that's why we've worked really aggressive to say we're going to consolidate as much as we can and hedge against those vendors that we feel really comfortable with, which forces us to say we're really good at this, maybe great at this, and not such at this. And we're okay with that. We're going to tell our customers that so that we can be really great at that one thing or two things and, scale that out. But when you're an enterprise customer, especially if you're in a market like healthcare, where it's even harder, right? You have massive regulatory pressure. If you're in finance, massive regulatory pressure, and you're trying to solve these problems. I think a lot of folks are throwing technology at the problems, right? And they're just like, that's going to solve it. They say this technology does that. And the more that you layer that on top of everything else that you've got going on, going back to the beginning of our conversation, that is why it makes it impossible to just forklift a hypervisor and move from one to the other, because there's a domino effect of consequences, between full stack integration. So I guess my number one caution or education I would share today for customers listening is get your house in order. Sit down and start with the fundamentals. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. Start with the applications and tier them out. Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, right? Then tier out your skills at those levels. Do your skills of your resources, your people, align by level? So as criticality gets higher, do your skills get thinner? Usually, because highly skilled resources cost you a lot of money, right? And so as you get up stack, those things that are highly skilled cost you a lot of money. Then after you do that, have you classified your data? Do you know what your data within those applications is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4? Before you pour frigging gas on it with AI, ML, or LLM, And then you're just like, here we go, we're ready to go. My CEO says, oh, look, he's tearing it down.
Destroying my backdrop.
He's fired up over this conversation. So I think it's incredibly important that folks understand you really got to do the fundamentals. Doesn't cost you any technology to do that. I'm having a lot of fun watching Chris struggle. But if you can organize your applications, organize your people and resources, then organize interesting data, you can make a ton of really great decisions from that point forward. And all of your partners, you can go prepared telling them what you want and get their feedback instead of being at the mercy of what you think is like, I think that's right. And then all of a sudden I've maybe bought a bunch of stuff I don't need and I'm spending money that I don't need to. So does that check the boxes for you, Ben, Justin, Chris?
I mean, like this is what we talked about on our other webinars, right? Is like when we did the data protection and DR. Hey, like, how about do people things first? Get your processes down. Know what you need to know. Like before you do, a DR test or set up your backups. Know what you need to know. If you don't know what your environment is and what you need, then throwing technology at it is you're just burning money.
Yeah, it's a good call out. Yeah. Well, guys, how did we do? I mean, other than Chris throwing a temper tantrum right back there, how did we like tech? Did we like tech talks? Is this something we want to continue to do?
I think it was fun.
Yeah, I'm game for them.
Yeah, I enjoyed the heck out of this type of format here, getting together and just talking because we all have different visibilities and different perspectives in our day-to-day lives. But it's fun to come back together and see some of the commonality, and it's the same decision points. We sit around as engineers and architects and people invested in this stack, and we go through the same evaluation of technology debt.
Yeah.
And we're talking about that right now. Who are the right partners to lean in on, so that when you find yourself in a evolution phase and a different decision point 5 years from now, that you can do it well. And I always feel like these types of conversations get people on the same page, make sure you're talking on the same path.
It's cool. It's good stuff. Well, I think next time we'll get together, we'll talk, we'll kind of go a deep dive into like where the networking trends are going. NSX is making some big moves, Fortinet, Cisco. There's been some big ones. Palo Alto is doing some big things right now. And I want to talk a little bit more about the convergence of security into networking, right? And I think a lot of people they still separate the two. They're like, well, this is networking, like, it's actually all security now. It's just a question of, do you understand the fundamentals of routing and switching within it?
Or ARP, ARP's an important
or
one.
ARP, if you don't know ARP, Matt's in trouble.
And I hate all of you.
We want people to tune into the next one here. We don't. We're going to start talking about ARP tables.
There's a first time for everything. You're all fired on live podcast. So I appreciate it so much, guys. Well, thanks so much for spending time, and we'll get this out onto the ether and see what the feedback is. We love it. Again, this is an open format. We've just been talking in-house. Like, these are conversations we have all the time as we're making hardware purchases or as we're doing design architecture for customers, and started to think, like, if we could put this content out there and folks could get it and see the difference of why we're different, and also give feedback of like, hey, this is helpful, could you give more in this area? This is a big commitment for us, is intelligence and insight, and trying to share that out to the world. So hopefully meaningful, but thanks so much for giving up your time, Ben and Justin and Chris.
I appreciate it.
And anytime I get to see Justin on camera is a win for me.
Oh, I want to go back and hide. That's where I live. Hang out with the engineers. They have it down.
I love it.